Welcome to the Mental Health Raw and Open podcast with your host, Jody Betty.
Hi, welcome to the Mental Health Raw and Open podcast. I'm your host, Jody, and today we have a very special guest, Amy Pagett. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm really good, thanks. I appreciate you coming on the podcast. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Yeah, of course. So tell me a little bit about yourself. I read your biography and you do so many things to do with trauma. I absolutely love it. I am nowhere near as trauma informed as you, but I am trauma informed, so I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Yeah. Yeah. So I am an elementary school teacher. I've been an elementary school teacher for 23 years, I think.
Oh,
Yeah. So that's where I started out. And I was really someone who just didn't even acknowledge that I had trauma. My go-to response was, I'm just going to push through. I'm going to be as busy as possible. Give me a job, I'll do it. And I'll just keep doing jobs and keep piling everything on. And just really staying busy as a way to avoid the fact that I had childhood trauma. And that worked for a really long time. I was really successful in a lot of ways. And then all of a sudden, everything came crashing down. I got really sick. It started with this itch on the palm of my hand, and then they turned into these oozing, ugly blisters. And then they were on the soles of my feet and my lips. Yeah.
oh,
And so it was an autoimmune disorder of some sort. It was basically my body talking to me, saying, you need to stop, you need to slow down. And so I was forced not, I couldn't work. And so then I had to navigate the disability system, which in and of itself is really, really difficult. It's a system that questions and cross-examines your truth. And I wasn't even really accepting my truth yet. Right. So then I finally had to tell my story, and I was denied disability the first time.
oh my God.
And so, here I was unable to work. Thankfully, I have a husband who could support me, but if I didn't, I would have been just left without pay. And so, I had a good support system, which was good. But then, I had to face, for me, it felt like a big rejection of getting denied, which I understand it's very typical of the system, right? And there are people that abuse it. So they were just, doing their due diligence as well.
Yeah,
But for me, it felt like, not being believed.
of
And
course. Yeah.
yeah, and so then I really had to dive into my own trauma and understand it. And so I was off work for 2 years, and those 2 years were all about healing for me. I had to really examine why I was the way I was. When I was little, my brother died. My dad owned an excavating business, and my brother suffocated in a landslide.
Oh
Um,
my God, I am so sorry to hear that.
yeah, and so I was there when that happened, and I carried the chaos and panic of that day. And my parents were never the same. That changed them.
Yeah.
And so I ended up taking on a lot of their trauma too, because then I became a people pleaser, and I want to make my parents happy again. And so it was very difficult for a family. Yeah. And then I was sexually abused. I
Oh
was,
my gosh.
yeah. And it was someone, a trusted person that my parents knew, and I never told anybody. And so I carried, the trauma from the death of my brother and then the sexual abuse forever, for a long time, like by myself,
Yeah.
and didn't tell anybody.
Yeah.
And, so it was that getting sick that was finally like, oh, it's all coming out. It's, it was my body keeping the score. It was, all coming to the surface and forcing me to deal with those unhealed wounds that I had just pretended didn't even exist.
It's so crazy how it always ends up with autoimmune something because I had the same thing. Like, I did the same thing. I was sexually abused from you know, 3 months to 14. My mom died when I was 19. And then I did what you did, which was just keep busy, do everything I can to just avoid. And then finally, when I had like my quote breakdown in 2016, shortly after that, I got this weird like swelling in my legs, and I went for every test possible in the history of mankind, and still to this day, 8 years later, it comes on and off.
Mhm.
But nobody can tell me what it is. So I've, done my own research, and I fully believe it's an autoimmune trauma response.
Yeah, I really feel like the body does, respond to that. And I
Yes.
think that's also the hard part too, right? Because for so long there wasn't a diagnosis for me, because nobody really knew what it was. And
Right,
so
right.
that makes it hard for applying for disability too.
Yes, yeah, and Ontario's, well, I'm on disability, so I hear you 100%. It's you're already in a fragile state, and having to keep proving that you're fragile is, and I understand to an extent why, but it just seems sometimes a little more obvious those who are doing things, that they shouldn't be doing compared to people who just really need help.
Yeah, yeah, and there's so much shame with trauma, right?
Yes.
And that just is coupled with that in the disability system, right? Because there feels like, oh, I remember feeling so much shame that I even had to apply for disability because,
Yes.
oh, I'm not good enough. I can't continue this, keep going, keep going, keep pushing. So, and shame is really that feeling of I am not, it is me, I am the problem.
Mm,
And so I felt so much shame for that. And that shame really is the old shame. That shame comes from that abuse, right? And so
yes. Yes.
it was really, I had to befriend that shame, which was really hard, right? Because shame, you really want to run from it, you want to hide from it, you don't want to name it, right? But it was in
Yeah.
naming it and developing a relationship with it that I was able to be like, okay, yeah, I am feeling shame, but it's not really my shame. I am here.
Yes, absolutely. You're the survivor of it, and unfortunately, it's like someone, packed us up with a backpack full of shame that we've had to carry around for so long, and it only comes in a certain period of time when you can, after you sit with it for however long it takes, that you can actually put that pack back down and say, you know what, this is not mine to carry.
Hmm. Yeah. And
What
that, yeah.
what type of things helped you like work through your trauma?
Yeah. So I did a lot and I feel like, everything that I tried so many different things and some things helped me a little bit and some things helped me a lot. I did therapy, I did coaching, I did EMDR, I did neurobiofeedback, I did electromagnetic therapy, which is like PEMF,
Mm-hmm.
frequency healing. And I did just a lot of changing within the way I interacted. And then I also did breath work and somatic work. And for me, those were the two really key things. Because when you have trauma, your breath is really shallow. It doesn't really reach deeper than your throat.
Mm-hmm.
And you often hold your breath. And I was really unaware that I was even holding my breath. I was, talking while holding my breath. And so, changing the way I breathe was huge. And then I also, I'm not sure if you've heard of Linda Ty.
Name sounds familiar.
Yeah, so she is just an amazing person. She teaches somatic embodiment. And so I took her 12-week course, and it was like life changing because I really understood why my body responded the way it did, and that it really was a trauma response, and it was holding in all that trauma for so long, and then slowly learning how to release that trauma within my body and also befriending it and understanding my nervous system, which is something I didn't understand before.
I know, right? Like for me, I have only in the past year not been on super high alert all the time. And, like that's just, it's so damaging to the body in so many ways to have like cortisol supposed to be like a fight or flight hormone. It's not supposed to be something that's pumping through you 24 hours a day.
Yeah. Yeah, that sympathetic activation, right? I lived
Yeah.
there. It was the only way that I knew how to survive, right?
Yeah.
Being
Yeah.
in that constant fight or flight. And I did a lot of exercised and I ran mud runs and like I did Tough Mudder and all of those things, as I look back, they were really reactivating that fight or flight for me. That felt familiar. I did
Yes.
not get to any calmness. I could only push my body as far as I could push it.
That sounds like fun, those little mud races. I've always wanted to do one.
They were fun. Yeah, they were fun, but they were a lot of work and a lot of pushing your body to its extremes,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like you're running up ski hills and then,
Yeah.
you know, getting electrocuted. Like
Oh
there's
my
live
gosh.
electrical wires hanging down and I'm just
Oh
going
my gosh,
to,
really?
yeah, just run through them. And it was that adrenaline rush that I was constantly seeking,
Seeking, yeah, absolutely. Can you
because
tell me a little bit more about somatic?
yeah. So somatic, soma means body. It's the Greek word for body.
Mm-hmm.
And so really it's learning to connect to your body and,
Okay.
just befriending it. So much of trauma is we push away, right? And with somatics, we develop a relationship with it. And
Okay.
where in your body are you feeling it? And how can we release it? How can we mobilize it within your body?
Okay.
Yeah, and shift it and just kind of really it is really befriending your body and understanding, when you feel shame, where do you feel it? Where are you feeling it within your body? What are the sensations that you're getting with shame?
Yeah, that's and a shame is always like a hard one because I find it like one of those words that is so powerful yet so hard to describe. Like the
Hmm.
feeling of shame. Like when you ask people, you're like, "Oh, I feel ashamed," and you're like, "Okay, what do you feel? How do you feel?" And it's a very difficult emotion to put words to, I find.
It is, yeah, but the more you befriend it, the easier it becomes, right?
Yes, yes.
And the more you accept that shame is showing up, like shame does still show up for me.
Uh,
And that's okay. I can name it and say, shame's here. I'm not going to push it away. I'm going to sit with it. I'm going to acknowledge it. For me, it's like that tightness in my chest,
okay.
and just kind of sitting with that feeling and knowing and noticing and naming what it is.
Right, right. I often find like I could be doing work or I could be doing nothing and my jaw is so clenched and I don't even know it and I'm like, why am I getting a headache? Right?
Mm,
And then I'm like, oh yeah, right, you're clenching your jaw for no reason. So then I'll like rub here a little bit and kind of try and get the muscles and just sit for a second and think, okay, am I feeling something or is it just like a habit of clenching my jaw, you know?
yeah, yeah, and which is pretty common too among trauma survivors. It's that clenching and holding, right? Because
Hmm.
I'm gonna I'm gonna prepare myself for what could happen.
I remember going to the dentist and he's like, "Oh, you should probably get a ninth guard because you grind your teeth at night." I was like, "No, sweetheart, it's during the day and I'm aware of it. Thank you."
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah,
pretty common. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And what type of breath work do you do?
Yeah, so I am a breathwork coach. So yoga, it's yoga breathing. And so
Okay,
it's really, I do it with meditation. And so
okay.
learning to connect to your breath. And also, you can do different types of breath work for different, to access different parts of your nervous system.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so if you wanted to, get into a parasympathetic state, you can elongate the exhale.
Okay,
So you would do 4 in, 8 out, and that's going to activate
okay, okay,
parasympathetic activation. And
okay.
then if you wanted to do a sympathetic activation, it would be really, really fast. So the speed depends on what part of your nervous system you activate.
Oh, that's cool. I last year I found 4 second box breathing, and
Mm,
someone mentioned to me like once you master doing that, then make your exhales longer. And I was just like, okay, like, but there was no explanation behind it. So thank you for explaining that because I wasn't sure like why I was supposed to like exhale for seven, not for four
yeah.
kind of
So
thing.
so
So
when you elongate your exhale, you are calming your nervous system and going into that parasympathetic. So there's
okay,
two parts um, to your nervous system. There's a sympathetic, which is like your fight or flight.
yep,
And then there's your parasympathetic, which is your rest and digest. And so within the parasympathetic branch, there's your ventral. So your ventral is that engaged state where you are engaged with people, you're engaged with yourself, you're engaged with the world. And then there is the dorsal. And so the dorsal is when you kind of go into that shutdown, complete,
Okay. Yeah.
disengage, disconnect from people.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you want to reach that kind of that ventral relaxation state, then you would elongate your exhale.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that for everyone, who's listening and for myself, so I can, start practicing that because
Mhm.
I'm a very busy mind person. Like my mind is always going like 100 miles a minute. So
Yeah.
uh, sometimes it's hard for me. I'm doing better with guided meditations.
Mm.
But if I just sit and like try and focus on my breath, I always like for the first 2 minutes, I'm like, oh, well, I'm getting this right down. And all of a sudden my mind's going and like 30 conversations are going on about what I need to do or whatever the case may be, what's spinning in my head. And then I find that I just like start focusing on my brain instead of my breath. So,
Mhm.
and then I have to like stop for a second and say, okay, wait a second, you're supposed to be meditating here. It's not focusing on your mind. Relax your mind and focus on your breath.
Yeah, and that is the great thing about breathing, right? Because as you're breathing, your focus really is on the breathing, and so that it allows the mind to quiet a little bit. But it's also important to understand that thoughts are going to come and go, and that's okay. You can allow them to come and go, and just give yourself compassion.
Yes, yes. Something I think that, I don't know whether it needs to be in the education system or something, but we need, as human beings, to learn that it's okay to give yourself permission to sit with feelings. It's okay to give yourself compassion and empathy and all the things that, you didn't get as a child. I recently did some inner child work over the last year, and it was like
Mhm.
very, I don't know, like when I was not done, because I don't know if I'll ever be done healing. It's a long journey for me, but
I think it's a continuous journey for everyone. I don't think we're ever really.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I think too. Yeah. And so it felt like such a release of like some weight that I'd been carrying to be able to like, I had, like it says, when sometimes you write a letter to your inner child or write a letter to your abuser. And I have I don't have a relationship at all. I've cut my father off completely because he's toxic. But I wrote like probably 18 pages of a letter to him that he'll never see. I didn't reread. And once I was done, I was just like, oh God, that felt so good. Just to get everything out that, even the little nitpicky things, but there's still nitpicky things that make that little voice in your head,
Mm.
saying, place these expectations on you when you're a small child and you realize you just grow up thinking, these are your expectations. And it took me a long time to realize these are not my expectations of myself. These are someone else's expectations of me, and I don't have to live up to them. I can dismiss them and have my own expectations.
Yeah, it's that relearning, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's so important, right?
Yeah, it is so important. Yeah. Yeah, and compassion. I think compassion is key because I feel like compassion is like the antidote to shame, right?
Hmm.
And so giving yourself compassion and others compassion too.
Yes, yes. And I think if there's a gift from trauma, I believe the gift from trauma for survivors is empathy. I
Hmm.
believe that, compassion and sympathy can be taught to a certain extent, but empathy is from a lived experience. I can understand you because I went through a similar experience as you. So for me with my trauma, it didn't make sense. Like, why did this happen? And what can I do with this? And then for me, my answer was, okay, I have to take my gift, which was empathy, out of the trauma and now give it back so
Hmm.
that my trauma made some sort of sense instead of just being this like, why did this happen to me for so long, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and what you said is true. Like it's really you can understand it when you've lived through it, right? Because
Yes.
it's really hard to explain those deep, deep rooted feelings of shame that you feel with
Yeah.
abuse. they become a part of you, and that's really difficult to understand unless you've experienced it and lived it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You must like Brene Brown.
I do, yeah.
I love Brene Brown. She's so awesome. I've
She
watched all her
is.
shows and her TED Talks and everything, and she's just like, she's amazing to me. And the fact that she's been able to like take shame and make a living out of studying shame is fascinating to me.
Hmm. Well, I think
It's,
it's also great that she talks about it, because shame is something that so many people don't want to talk about.
yes.
you
It's
know?
like taboo for some reason, you know?
Yeah, well, it's uncomfortable, right? It's a very uncomfortable topic, and it's not something that, a lot of people say, "Oh, I don't have any shame," you know?
Yeah.
It's a really difficult thing to admit that you're carrying shame.
Yeah. And it's so funny because like if you ask, like if I ask you, what would you describe as shame? Like how do you describe shame?
Hmm. Yeah, well, shame is that it's a feeling of I am not good enough, right?
And in there, like a deep inner, like
Yeah,
for me, it's a core value feeling, you know?
yeah, like a core belief that I am not good enough,
Yes.
I am not worthy. And if there's any hint of shame coming in to, support that theory, then I am going to feel even more shame, right? So like like that's the tricky part about shame. You can, if you have it and someone brings it up, you feel more shame.
Right. Yeah, I know,
Mhm.
right?
And
I guess
so it's that there has to be a relationship to it in order to shift it.
yeah, absolutely. And how, like, how do you approach forming a relationship with shame? It's just one
Yeah.
of those things where you have to remind yourself, like, I am worthy and I am valuable. Just, I am not, so many people identify with their label or their trauma. And I tell people, you are you. Okay,
Hmm.
your label is whatever. Your trauma happened to you. It is not you. There is still you under your shame, under your trauma.
Hmm.
So I like to try and separate the two because um I feel like so many people just get weighed so down by it. And I was one of them for years, like just carrying um because my abuse happened so young and with so many different people, it was just like from the age of 5, I was like, what the hell am I doing wrong here? Like something is going on and I don't know what's wrong and
Hmm.
it just never felt like I fit in. I bounced around the foster care system for a while and uh, it just always was with me for, as long as I can remember, I carried shame. And I think I still have some to a certain extent, but I know that I have sat with a lot of it and really worked on trying to, you know, rewire my brain and retrain my brain that I am not this, entity of shame, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think, shame is somewhat protective in a lot of ways, right? Like we feel that shame, oh, it's my fault, I'm going to own it, and that's going to, take me away from what
Hmm.
happened. But it's, so sometimes it can be protective, but it is really developing a relationship with it and understanding that, okay, it's here. I'm not going to run from it.
I
Hmm.
think that's a key with a lot of healing is just being able to, sit with whatever feeling it is, whether it's shame or, feeling for a long time, I just felt like, I don't know, just not even just the shame, just unworthy and like hopeless. And it I had to literally like sit and say, it's okay for you to be okay. It's okay to have okay days, and not expect like the other shoe to drop or not always be waiting for, oh God, something good happens. Oh my God, something bad's got to happen next because that was always the pattern, right?
Hmm.
So I kind of learned last year that I don't need to carry that shoe that's gonna drop because if I don't have a shoe, maybe it won't drop.
Yeah, and you said it's okay to be okay, but it's also okay to be not okay.
Yes,
right? And
absolutely.
allowing both to coexist, because so often we think it's not okay. We have to be okay all the time.
Yes, yes.
Mm.
I'm a big proponent of it's okay if not to be okay, but I think so much so that I had to remind myself that when I had a good day, that was okay to have a good day,
Mhm.
because there always felt like there was going to be like an impending sense of doom that came after that good day. So I was like almost afraid when I was having a good day. And now I'm more like, oh, it's okay. I'm having a good day. And if I'm not having a good day, that's okay too.
Mhm.
Just kind of sit and go with the flow of however my feelings are at the time.
Yeah, and then what you're talking about is that hypervigilance, right? Like always being on guard, and again, it's that protective piece. I'm going to keep
Yes.
myself safe, and the only way I can keep myself safe is to anticipate everything that could possibly go wrong.
Yes, that is so true. I spent a lot of time doing that. Oh my God, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. And I lived in, behind a fortress with a big wall and a moat and crocodiles, so nobody could get near me kind of thing because the consequence of um, being hurt far outweighed any benefits that I saw at the time of letting anyone in.
hmm Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's again that protective piece, right? And it's so when you have experienced trauma and you've been hurt, that protective piece becomes so strong.
Yes, and I am grateful for it at the time because it kept me alive for all these years.
hmm
Um, and I had to almost one of my inner child work as I wrote a letter and I said, like I appreciate you keeping me alive and all the things that you've done for me, but I don't need you in the same form or manner as I did before. I am safe now. I'm physically safe now. And that's something I just have to, and still to this day, I keep reminding myself to, focus on those things and try and again, do a little bit of breath work and a little bit of meditation, those kind of things, just to kind of like stay grounded because I was very much um, focus on the past or worry about the future.
Yeah, and missing the here and now.
Yes, absolutely. And, in the long run, the here and now is what's important. And breath work, I find, is something that's very easy to bring myself back into the here and now.
Yeah, breathwork can be really powerful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and it can help you know what nervous system state you're in as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's really cool. I didn't know that until we chatted.
yeah.
So that's
There's
awesome.
a
I
little
think.
test if you want to know. Like you can test your body. So you just take your hand and you exhale from your nose onto your hand,
Okay.
and then notice which nostril is more dominant. Is it your left or your right? And
Okay.
if you exhale and your left is more dominant, you're in a parasympathetic state. If your right is more dominant, you're in a sympathetic state.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, and a healthy
I
nervous
didn't know that.
yeah, and a healthy nervous system should fluctuate. Like you should shift between the two, and it's becomes unhealthy when you get stuck in one. So for me, I was stuck in that sympathetic fight or flight for a really long
Yeah.
time.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think a lot of people can, learn from that because it's something I've done a lot of reading and I've never heard that before. So that's so neat to know because it's so, you know, I feel like the more informed you are about these things and self-informed as well, that it just makes it almost easier to practice them.
yeah, and it's that awareness piece, right? Like, in order
Yes.
to befriend your nervous system, you really need to know where it's sitting, right? If you have no awareness of what it feels like, when you're in a parasympathetic state or you're in a sympathetic state, then it's really going to be really hard to shift. So, doing that little nostril test and saying, oh, it's on the left, I'm in a parasympathetic state, then I'm relaxed. And what does my body feel like right now when I'm in this state?
Oh, that's very cool. It's like yesterday I was all like just not having a great day. And I was like, you know what I need is water therapy. So
Mm,
we went down to the beach, and for me, just like putting my feet in the water and just listening to water is like the most grounding thing.
mm,
And we were only there for maybe an hour, and when I came back out, I was just like, I just feel so much better, and my body relaxes, and I don't feel like hypervigilant. Like usually I know, who's around me within 6 feet at all times, eyes in the back of my head kind of thing. And it's nice when I come out from a situation like that, that I'm just like so chill that, I'm cognizant of people around me, but I'm not like hyper focused on them.
Yeah, that self-awareness piece, right? And knowing what works for you, because there's different things that work for different people. And it sounds like for you, water is a great grounding.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The barefoot on the sand thing. I
Yeah,
was
yeah.
born in the wrong country, I tell you.
I love the beach too. It's very calming.
It is. It's so, I don't know, there's just something about the sound of water crashing in and just rolling, and it's just so relaxing for me. It's just always been my thing, maybe because I grew up around water. We had a cottage and I was on sailboats when I was young and stuff, and I was just had that feeling of like I don't get seasick, so there can be waves and I'm just like, oh yeah, this is so nice.
Lovely. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, um, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add. I don't know if you have another client today or if you have a time limit or anything. So, um,
Yeah, no, I don't today, not till later. I host a space on Twitter.
oh
Um,
yes, tell me about that.
so that's every Wednesday at 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And
Perfect.
I do that with Dr. Bob Bear and Amy Dublay.
That's so funny because I am doing a podcast with Amy Dublay after this, and I am doing a podcast with Dr. Bear it is next
I
week.
could be pronouncing that wrong.
That's okay. I'm going to ask him too because I was like, is it beer or bear? I'm not sure, but I'll
Yeah,
ask.
yeah,
Yeah, so that's
yeah.
awesome. Twitter Spaces have grown, and I find the mental health community in them is really quite supportive.
Yeah. And so ours is called Trauma, a Somatic Conversation.
Okay.
And yeah, and so it's just a great space, and it's a space for the people to really share, and a safe space to talk about, what's going on within your body. And
Oh,
Amy,
that's awesome.
yeah, and Amy and Dr. Bob are such amazing people with so much knowledge. Yeah.
I
So,
looked at the three of you and I was just like, oh my goodness, I need to get these people on my podcast because you guys are all so trauma informed, but in different areas. And I find, it's like in my space that I hold, it's just a really small community. I don't record it because I was asked by someone not to record it, so they felt more comfortable sharing their experiences.
mhm,
And it's been so lovely just being able to form a community with like-minded people, with, meeting people on all different stages of their journey, which I find so helpful because you almost can, I mean, comparison, unfortunately, a nasty human habit.
mhm,
Um, but we can kind of like see where we are in our journey as compared to where other people, and if someone's further ahead, that kind of sometimes gives you hope that you can reach, you know, to the aspiration of where that person is, that, if
mhm.
they've survived it, you can survive it too. And I always remind people, man, you survived the trauma, you're gonna survive the healing.
Yeah, yeah, and you're right. Like we don't want to compare and shame ourselves, but rather if we see someone be inspired.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I've learning to get out of my comfort zone. I started looking at things instead of being so afraid of everything, with a sense of curiosity instead. So I'm trying to replace fear with curiosity. So I will do like when I started the podcast back up, I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? This is ridiculous. It's been 3 years since I've done that. Who wants to listen to me? Like all these things. And then I was like, time out. Worst case scenario. Well, nobody listens and I don't have to tape another one. Is that really going to affect my life in the grand scheme of things with all the stuff I've been through? And I was like, no, it's not. So therefore, the risk is okay to take because there's no, end consequence that's going to devastate me. So,
Yeah.
and then I've been trying to kind of apply that type of thinking to many areas of my life so that I don't feel so, afraid to step out and try something new. Because again, trauma survivors, I think one thing in common is, um, because we have carried so much shame or still carry shame, there's that, am I good enough to be doing this? Right?
Mhm.
Like, who am I to host a podcast? Like, oh my gosh, like, and
Mhm.
then when you just put yourself out there, it's like, oh, it's good, like I've had great conversations and I've met new people, and
Yeah.
it's been really helpful for me and for other people. So that's a gift for me to be able to give back.
Yeah, I agree. And you have such a very calming presence too, which I'm sure makes your guests feel comfortable. So I
Oh,
think
thank you.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just kind of a chill person. I'm not too, I mean, usually I'm in a hyper vigilant state, but I'm still chill at the same time. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, so that's awesome.
Yeah.
Um,
And I love that
I
you named
will,
curiosity. Like I think curiosity is key, right? We have to get curious and
yes,
and
yes,
and explore what's happening and explore with compassion.
yes, absolutely. It was the silliest little things. Like I'd be like, okay, I want to start painting. And I was like, oh God, I can't paint. Like, and then when I rationalize it, I'm like, well, first of all, it's just me painting. I don't have to show it to anyone. Why am I expecting myself to be Picasso?
Yeah.
Right? Like off the bat, like it's just one of those things where I was like, I'm not good enough to paint, so I can't try it. And now I'm saying the exact opposite, whereas who cares if I'm good at it? It's something I want to try. It could be fun. I could be good. I could be crap. But at the same time, it's just something that I want to do, and that's okay, you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah, and it's that old narrative, I'm not good enough is an old
Yes.
narrative, and
Yes.
it's changing that narrative and exploring
Yes.
it, and
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been really helpful. That, and I used to be very reactionary. I have CPTSD. So if someone I had 100 triggers. Now I have two major ones. If someone hits them, um, I'm about 50-50, but I'm getting towards the 60-40, where I
Mhm.
can take that pause for 5 minutes before I do anything. So whether it means turning my phone off, my laptop off, getting up and going out in the backyard with the dogs,
Mhm.
um, anything like that, to just not be able to instantly emotionally react, because when I do, it's never a good thing. And, I spend my time afterwards thinking, well, how did those thoughts get out of my head into verbal words? And then I have spent that time apologizing for what I've said. So now I'm trying to put the pause into
Mhm.
effect where I can just stop.
Yeah.
Because when I respond emotively, it's not necessarily good. When I take the 5 minutes, I can now put a little bit more of a rational or logical approach onto it.
Yeah, the pause is so powerful, right? And
Yes.
what you're talking about is that sympathetic activation. And when our bodies get in that state, our voice often becomes demanding and commanding. It is a survival state, that fight,
Yes.
and
Yes.
fighting words come out, and
Yes. Yeah.
it's a survival response.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so
And
the pause.
yeah, absolutely. I didn't even know about the pause. I actually learned about the pause through a Stoic space.
Mm.
I didn't know anything about Stoicism. I thought it was like manly man, everything. And then I kind of went to a couple of spaces with the friends of mine were hosting, and I was like, oh, it's so weird to me that these, things that people were struggling with, so long ago, the basic principles are the still same basic principles that people are struggling with today.
Hmm.
So the Stoic pause was really important for me, and I found it easy because it was something I could put into practice easily. It wasn't like, a CBT or a DBT skill or something that I had to like memorize and then analyze or whatever else. I could just like shut up and go for a walk for 5 minutes, right?
Yeah, so powerful, right? And I think that's it too. We sometimes think that there are these really complex things that we need to do to heal, and sometimes they're just the simple things.
Yeah, absolutely. And one step at a time. Like, I'm a huge baby steps. You can never just jump to the top of the ladder. You have to take the first rung. And if it takes you 10 steps to get to the first rung, that's awesome, because you made those 10 steps. And even if you go 10 steps forwards and 4 steps backwards, that's still progression. And I try and push people to pat themselves on the back and to be proud of themselves for just the little things. Like if you're super depressed and you haven't showered in a couple of days and you got up and had a shower, then I want to be the one to tell you, I'm proud of you for having a shower. Like, I think that's awesome that you did that, because for some people it's so easy and for you it was so difficult, yet you still managed.
Yeah. Yeah. It's celebrating those small gains.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's so
So much
awesome.
wisdom, Jody. So much wisdom.
That's what I'm learning from you as well, my friend.
Yeah.
I appreciate you. I thank you so much for your time. I hope that maybe we can, come back on and we can just like pick a topic and just chit chat about it. That would be really cool because
I would love that.
you
Yeah.
do know so much. So that'd be awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I would
Um,
love it. And thank you so much for reaching out and for
oh,
inviting
of
me to your
course.
space.
Of course. I saw you guys and I was just like, oh, look at all these trauma informed people. May I send you a DM, please?
Yeah. Yeah. No,
So
it's wonderful. And please
I
feel free to join our space tonight if you'd like.
I'm going to set a reminder in my phone as soon as we're done this, so I do remember to pop in. So yeah, that's Wednesday nights at 6. So that's
Yeah.
awesome, and I will see you there for sure.
Perfect.
And thank you again for your time. I
Yeah.
appreciate you. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll chat soon and set up another podcast and just pick a topic and we'll go on it.
I would love that. Thank you so much.
Awesome. You're welcome. You take care of yourself.
Okay. Bye.
Okay. Bye, Amy.
Thank you for listening to the Mental Health Raw and Open podcast with your host, Jody Betty. If you enjoyed today's show, please give it a like and don't forget to smash that subscribe button. And if you appreciate the work I do, why not buy me a coffee? Details in the show notes. Today's episode was recorded and edited by Dorian Kent and produced by Jody Betty and Dorian Kent. This has been a Raw and Open production.